Excellencies, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are now continuing our meeting to the next agenda, that is to hear the speaker speech, which will be delivered by Assistant Professor Dr. Sumal Saporable, RDN from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, Assistant Professor Jung San Chang, PhD from Taipei Medical University, Taiwan, and Professor John Willem Alfenar, PhD, PharmD from the University of Sydney, Australia. And this afternoon session will be moderated by Mr. Nur Andrian Ilsan, PhD. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Nur Andrian Ilsan.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurentine. Okay, for all of the participants, I am Nur Andrian Ilsan. I will become a moderator for the second session. And before I start, I want to tell you that three outstanding speakers. The first one is Associate Professor Dr. Suemol Suparabol, RDN, from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand, with the topics current dietary pattern in diabetes mellitus management. And the second one is Associate Professor Jung San Chang, PhD, from Taipei Medical University, Taiwan, with the topic detections and hematological impact in COVID-19 patient in Taiwan. And the last one, Professor Jan Willem Alfenar, PhD, PharmD, from the University of Sydney, Australia, with the topic Therapeutic Drug Monitoring in Infectious Disease. And for all of the speakers have a time for 30 minutes for speech. And then afterward, they will have a Q&A session for 15 minutes. And for the first speaker, Associate Professor Dr. Suemol, can you show the CV? So for the CV, we can see Prof. Dr. Suemol Suparabol. For the research interest is clinical nutrition, metabolic syndrome, diabetes mellitus, and obesity. For the education, she took the Bachelor Science from Thammasat University, Thailand, for the master degree from Chulalongkorn University, and for PhD from Loma Linda University from US. And then she took the training in 2002 and 2003 for clinical dietitian from US. And also, can you share more below? And for publication, we cannot read one by one, but one of the recent publication is together with our Tikas Mitra Keluarga teacher, Miss Guntari Prasetya, right? And then, so now is your turn, Professor Suemol Suparabol, for 30 minutes. Time is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Suwimon Savarobon. I'm from the Faculty of Allied Health Science, Chulalongkorn University. And today my topic is about the dietary pattern in the diabetic mellitus. Okay. So this is my university. I'm from Chulalongkorn University actually, and this is the university. And I'm from the Faculty of Allied Health Science, and this is the building that we are in. And in this faculty, we have many bachelor degrees, which is the Bachelor of the Science in Medical Technology, Physical Therapy, Nutrition and Dietetics, Radiation Technology, and my department is Nutrition and Dietetics. And we have also the Master of Science and the PhD programs. Okay, just to introduce you where I'm from. my topic is about the dietary pattern in the diabetic mellitus management. Before that, I'll go through all the topic that I'm going to cover for today. First, I'm going to cover about the goals of nutrition therapy in diabetic mellitus, because as a dietitian, we have to work with the diabetic patients, and then we have to know the goal of nutrition therapy first to see if we can how to work with them for our patient to reach the goal. And then the second, the patients, because right now many especially in countries, because every one of us knows that what will happen after you have the diabetic mellitus is that the metabolism is going to be changed. We have to learn what are the dietary pattern that we're going to use or the patient day. So I'm going to cover the Mediterranean style diet, vegetarian and vegan, and also low carbohydrate diet. In terms of low carbohydrate diet, we have many kind of low carbohydrate diet, because if you have low carbohydrate, either you will have high in protein or high in fat. Today I use the ketogenic, the most popular one. We call it intermittent. If you want to call it IF, these are the outline that I'm going to cover today. Okay. First of all, I would like to talk about the goal of the nutrition therapy in the DM. In nutrition therapy for the DM, we are trying to promote and support the healthful eating pattern. So when we say healthful eating pattern, we mean that the DM peoples can have the same food as the healthy people have, but the thing is that they have to be different in the portion size and also the timings, especially when they using the insulin shot. So the portion size and the timing is very important for those kind of peoples. Okay, so these are only the concern for DM patients, and the goal is to improve blood glucose, also the hemoglobin A1C, and blood pressure and the cholesterol levels. And we're trying to achieve and maintain body weight for the DM patients and also the blood pressures. And the last one, which is the most important thing, is to delay and prevent complication of the diabetes. Okay, these are the goals that we are trying to work with the diabetic peoples. And also we would like also to for our patient to eating by providing positive message about the food choice, while limiting some of the food choice only when indicated by a scientific evidence. So we are trying to let our patient eat whatever except there's a scientific evidence that saying that this is not good for the patient. So anything that is no scientific evidence, then we are not recommend a patient to avoid all those food. Okay, so these are the goals for diabetics peoples. And usually if you go through the website or the recommendation guideline of the American Dietetic Associations, because I'm graduate from US, so I'm trying to use the American Dietetics Association, but if you graduate from some European country, you have some different guideline. Also in Asian, we have our own guideline also, but I prefer the American Diabetes Associations because I think this one is kind of generous for our patients. So they are focusing on the ABC A is the hemoglobin A1C. So we are trying to lower the hemoglobin A1C to lower than 70%, 7%. And we control the blood pressure to less than 130/80 milligrams mercury. And then we are trying to control the LDL cholesterol to less than 100 milligram per deciliter. These are the ABC that American Diabetes Association, guide or recommend us to talk or to work with our patients. Okay, and these are the things that we going to see today. So, as I mentioned, now that we have many dietary practice patterns or whatever you want to call. So that's a survey about this. And after the survey, the top 10 nutrition trends in 2020 is this. Okay, you will see that we are working on the sustainable and environmentally friendly nutrition. So anything that environmental friendly, then is in trends. And then the second one is the vegans and the plant-based nutrition. And I'm going to touch on this topic in the moment. Maybe because plant-based or the vegan or vegetarian nutritions are based on the environmental friendly. So that's why they are, popular right now. You will see lots of people are doing this or practice the vegetarians and vegan nutrition. And also we have personalized nutrition, which, is depend, you have your own personalized to work on this. And then we have alternative proteins. Right now, we focusing on the protein from insects and plant-based. That's two protein that very popular right now. The first one is the plant-based. The second one is the insects protein. So we are trying to work on those, and those two proteins are becoming, popular right now. And then we have health at every size, mindful eating. This one is, and then we have also the meal replacement. This one you can take it as one meal. So you replace your normal diet with the meal replacement in terms of, to control some energies and some nutrients. And we have ketogenic diets, which I'm going to touch on this a little bit in a moment. And then we have sugar-free nutrition. These are the trends that are coming on the nutrition majors right now. And once, some group of researchers do the surveys in US, I have to tell you that these surveys are from US. We don't have any survey like this in Thailand and in Asian country. If your guy interested in doing this survey, you can do it, during the conference or whatsoever, so that you get a result. But these surveys are from the US countries. And you will see that the most popular one is the low carbohydrate and high fat, which is the ketogenic diet. 19% of the people in the surveys practice this. And the second one is the vegetarian and vegans. We don't know how many percent, but we thought that it's going to be greater than 8%. And then the third one is the Mediterranean diet, which is it's composed of about like approximately 70% of the people in the survey practice Mediterranean diet. And as I mentioned, because these surveys are conducted in US, so Mediterranean diet is, the third place in the survey. But if you conducted this survey in some European country, you might see different numbers. Okay, and I would like to start first with the Mediterranean diet. If you look at the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet, you will see that their pyramids are different from our pyramid, because they're focusing on the whole grains and whole wheat and fruit and vegetables. And for the proteins, they focus on the fish, which is the ocean fish protein. And, you know, avoid, and they drink wine regularly. So the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet are different. And you can tell, because if you are a nutrition major, you can tell that the food guide pyramid will be rich in the phytonutrients or the vitamins and omega-3 fatty acid. And there will be less in the saturated fat, trans fat, and all those things. So if you are in the nutrition major, you can guess that. This, I showed the clinical trials of the Mediterranean diet, and you can see that all the results of the clinical trial conclude that the Mediterranean diet lower the risk of the cardiovascular disease and the type 2 diabetes. Because of this, if you're interested in the Mediterranean diet, I recommend you to go to the study, go to the research that called PDMed. PDMed is one of the big, very huge research on the Mediterranean diet, and it's randomized controlled trials, and all the systematic reviews are on this. And you can tell that because of, high in phytonutrients, omega-3 fatty acid, and all fibers, because they focus on the fruit and vegetables. So the Mediterranean diet is very high in fibers. All of these play an important role for the Mediterranean diet to lower the risk of the cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And if you look at this table, I got this from BMJ, which is the journals from the European countries. And they say that because all of these food that the Mediterranean people eat are very positive, very good for health, for all the NCD, which is the non-communicable disease. So that's why we see all the benefit of, the Mediterranean diet. And this is I got this from the Journal of the Diabetic Care. So if you want to read the whole journals, you recommend too, because it's very interesting reading these journals. And then we will see that the potential benefit of the Mediterranean diets are very, very promising, that it will reduce the risk of the diabetes and reduce the A1C levels, and also reduce the triglyceride levels, and end up this Mediterranean diet food reduce the risk of the cardiovascular events. So that's the Mediterranean diet. The second one is the vegetarian and vegans. Okay, when we talk about vegetarian and vegans, we have to make sure that we understand the definitions or the terms, the same first. We have to understand first what is this mean. For the vegetarian and vegans, usually they focus on the fiber, because as they don't eat any kind of meat, and all the vegetables and the fruits are high in fiber, vitamin, minerals, phytonutrients, and all of these are very protective on the NCD. So we have seen all of this, eating with the vegetarian and vegans. And because they have not eating any kind of, red meat or protein meat, so the vegetarians and vegans are low in the saturated fatty acid and the trans fat, okay? And because of the protein contains fiber and high amount of the vitamin and minerals, again, this one has very promising benefit in terms of diabetics and non-communicable disease. And I give you this because that's the difference of different of vegetarian and vegans. So mostly if you are vegetarians, you avoid all of the protein meat, and you focus on the plant-based protein. But you have to make sure that you understand for the plant-based protein, or if you want to call it plant-based diet, there's no definition yet, because definition of the plant-based diet is encourage plant food. So we don't know how many percent of plant food. They just said that they encourage plant food. We don't know how many percent of the animal food that people are allowed to eat. So it just say that if you want to practice plant-based diet, you just limit animal products. So we don't know how many percent. So these are the difference. Okay. And if you look at the vegans and vegetarians, you see that whether you are lacto-ovo vegetarian or vegans, you have less consumption in cholesterol levels. And also you have high in dietary fibers. So these are the protective effects on the diabetic mellitus, because if you have high in fibers, you have less in Adventist Health Study working on the vegetarian dietary pattern. And you will see that on communicable disease or for the metabolism, you have better improvement in the metabolic syndromes. And and I concluded that vegetarian and vegan diet has reduced risk of diabetics, reduced the A1C levels, and increased weight loss, and lower in HDL and lower LDL and non-HDL levels. So this is good. But before we conclude, we have to make sure that we understand about the vegetarians, because for the plant-based diet, they may have limited amounts of the essential amino acid, because we all know that the animal protein or animal food contain all the essential amino acid, but the plant's protein contain limited amounts of essential amino acid. So these are the things that you probably have to concern, or have to at least assess your patients, from time to time. And also ions, zinc, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B12, omega-3 fatty acid, and iodines. These are all the nutrients that probably be a problem if your patients are follow vegetarians or vegans. So you have to make sure that you assess all these nutrients time to time. And then the third one is the low carbohydrate diet. Before go through the low carbohydrate diet, we have to make sure that we understand the dietary reference intake values or the nutrient compositions, because for macronutrients about the carbohydrate, protein, and fat, these are the recommendation of the carbohydrate, protein, and fat compositions from the USDA recommendation and IOM recommendation. Usually they recommend, people to eat carbohydrate approximately 45 to 50 or 55%, and protein for 10 to 50%, and fat to, up to 30% from fat. Okay, these are the recommendation. But if you want to follow the low carbohydrate diet, means that you have a level, very low level or low composition of the carbohydrate intake. It can go to very, very low. In some people, they follow the low carbohydrate diet and they ingest only 10 to 20% of, total calories from carbohydrate. They can do that, but we are not recommend, doing that, especially in DM peoples or in the diabetics patients. If you look at the food pyramid of the low carbohydrate diet. These are the food pyramid of the low carbohydrate diet. You will see that they flip the pyramid over. Means that usually we have grain, like whole grain and all these things at the bottom. But for the low carbohydrate diet, they flip the pyramid over. So the grains
I'm
are
sorry, Prof.
very.
So your time is 10 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. And these, they flip the pyramid over. So the grains are on the top of the pyramid, means that they eat very little amounts of the grains. And, if you look at the study about the low carbohydrate diet, you will see a promising result because, almost all of the clinical trial that has been done on the low carbohydrate diets are reporting lower in A1C, body weight, and also all of this, so that's why if you look at the low carbohydrate diet, you will see that all the low carbohydrate diet like reduce in A1C, reduce the weight, reduce blood pressures and triglycerides and all those things. However, if we lower the carbohydrate diet to maybe like 10 to 20%, look at the ketogenic diet in the tables. Carbohydrate diet, the carbohydrate composition can be lower than, lower to 10 to 20%. And they are high in fat because the ketogenic diets are very high in fat. They can, they allow people to ingest fat to 65 to 70%. And this is really, really high in fat and low in carbohydrate. So what they study, what they report from the ketogenic diet, they was reported that the ketogenic diet can, have the beneficial effects on the cardiovascular disease, weight loss, diabetes, and the microbiomes and epigenomics, and also on the cancers. However, in terms of nutritionists, we are saying that it's not suitable for some kind of type 2 diabetic patients, pregnant and lactating women, and people at risk of the having to be concerned already with the metabolism. So we are not recommending all these kind of people to follow the diet. Okay, you can call it IF in short. For intermittent fasting, they are not working on the composition of the macronutrients. Instead, they're working on the timing of the eating. So they set the time to fast and time to feed. Okay. So they have feed time and fast time. I would like to show you this study. So you see the figure. Okay, this is the conclusions. You see that they feed the mice with the diet, and normals, the blue color refer to the normals, and athlete feed mice, which is, the mice can eat any times, feed the normal diet. And the second one is the normal diet, but it's time restricted, means that they feed the mice 12 hours and the mice sleep for 12 hours per day. And then the third one is the high fat time they want diet, and this one is high. So sleep was the diet fed at limitum mouse was remarkably fatter than the high-fat diet fed time restricted mouse. Means that timing is very important. You cannot let yourself eat anytime you like. You have to have a feed time and a fast time. So this might be the first to introduce, people about the intermittent fasting. So we have many kind of intermittent fasting. You have like 12-hour fast, you have 24 hours, you have all these, type of the fasting, but you have to be careful because the timing that you fast is going to switch your body to use the glycogen that you saw in mostly in the livers to be used as the precursor for ATP synthesis. So it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be a tough time for people, especially in the DM patients. And we have done this. I have done this with Kuntali, one of your staff, a couple years ago. We have observed the people, during Ramadan and see if they can improve any kind of metabolic profiles. And we see that a month after Ramadan, the weight, the body mass index, and also the waist circumference are lower. Means finish the Ramadan has lower weight, BMIs, and waist circumference. And we have also observed that the HOMA-IRs and quick-Ps and the total cholesterol and everything are improving. Means that Ramadan might be some things to improve our parameters of health, because you are fast 12 hours and then eat 12 hours. And, intermittent fasting. And for intermittent fasting people, and also the pregnant and lactating women also. So we are not recommend people who have diabetes because of the metabolic switch that I already mentioned. So in conclusions, so what can we recommend? In terms of macronutrients, the paper recommend that no ideal percentage of the calorie from carbohydrate, protein, and fat for all people with at risk of diabetes. So you have to follow the same amount of the healthy peoples, and the macronutrient distribution should be based on individualized assessment. So if you have diabetes, you have to go talk to manage your macronutrient distribution according to your blood course. So these are the things that the papers are concerned. In terms of the mix of the macronutrients, they switch back to the healthy peoples. These are the recommendations. And in terms of carbohydrate, the recommended dietary allowance for carbohydrate for adult with diabetes is at least 130 grams per day. This is the minimum amount to maintain the blood glucose. And in terms of protein, we still recommend 12 or 15 to 20% for protein intake. And for fat, the type and the quality of fat is the concern, not the amount of fat. So you have to observe your patients, the quality of fat, okay? And end up, the paper recommend that for diabetics people, they have to emphasize on non-starchy vegetables to minimize added sugars and refined grains, and should whole grain over highly processed food to the extent that possible. Before I finish, I would like to show you this because it's really important. There's many research on many things. You will see all the research, all the testimonials from people, and you have to tell the strength of the evidence. If the study is case study or the case report, this strength of evidence is very weak, and the cross-sectional case control cohort and randomized control trials. And if you want to follow anything, you have to make sure that the strength of the evidence is based when it is a meta-analysis or systematic reviews. Okay, if the study is case study or the case report, this one is the strength of the evidence is very weak. So you make sure that understand report this come to the end of my presentations, and let food be your medicines. These are the costs for the dietitians. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Swimmer, for a nice talk. So now we are turning to the Q&A session. And maybe because of limited time, so I will allow only one question first. Anybody want to ask? Or if I saw in chat box, Ms. Guntari want to ask. Thank you for your amazing presentation, Prof. I would like to ask, do you have any information regarding the choice of diet by people with T2D based on US survey? Is there any certain condition of patient needs to be considered so that they may know that their diet is suitable or not? Thank you, Professor.
Because on the survey in US, they don't have, we still haven't seen any survey on the type 2 diabetics patients, but the survey that we have done is they have done is the survey on the healthy people. And good, I mean, it might be good if we have done this yet.
Okay. So for because we still have a time, so we'll allow another question. The second question is from Arinda. As most recommended approach for elderly by seeing Southeast Asia culture. Thank you, Prof.
These kind of patients, especially in the elderly, and then you recommend, I will recommend like 45 to 55% as a carbohydrate, and then for 15 to 20% for the proteins, and then the rest are from fat. Just like I say, for the carbohydrate, if you focus on the whole grain or whole wheat, might be good, because whole grain, whole wheat contains lots of phytonutrients, fiber, and vitamins, minerals, and all those things. And for the protein, if you can focus on the protein that easily digests, especially when you work with the elderly, protein that easily digested might be good for the elderly people. And for the fat, do as much as you can to avoid the trans fat and also the saturated fat. These are the recommendations for elderly people, with the diabetics.
Okay, we still have a time. Is there anyone want to ask? Is there any question? Aida, how ketogenic diet improve dyslipidemia despite the fat distribution in diet is more than 70%?
Okay, I got all the questions from my student. Okay, good. Junaida is one of my students too, and she's in Thailand right now. You know what? Because the ketogenic, they have less in the less of, by reducing the carbohydrate intake means that they probably reduce all the triglyceride levels. Okay, so by reducing the triglyceride levels, the dyslipidemia is improving. So it's work, directly like that.
We still have a time, around 6 minutes. Is there any question? Or maybe I will ask something. So it's a short question. I mean, I'm not in the field of the nutrition, but we know that some of the group, like they trust vegetarian is better than non-vegetarian. Like, for example, if we compare between vegetarian versus vegetarian with the little bit fat, like red meat or something. So do you have any idea for that?
You mean working with the people who have, who practice vegetarians? So
like
so for
the beneficial.
Oh, okay. For vegetarian diet, because the names already tell you that they are vegetarians, mean that they're focusing on the vegetables and fruit. In terms of protein, it might be different because they are not eating any kind of meat. So avoiding meat, the red meat or white meat or whatsoever, they probably has less in the essential amino acid, because we all know that essential amino acid contained in the meat, milk and egg. Okay, majority of the milk, egg and all the red meat, white meat contain lots of essential amino acid. But for the vegetables and fruit, I mean, it's plant, whether they have beans and all those things. The beans are protein, but it's plant-based protein. So all those beans are limited in the essential amino acid. Okay, beans, grain, and all those things like corns, all those plant food, essential amino acid. So if you want to ingest or if you want to follow the vegan or vegetarians, you have to, you have to eat varieties of the plant protein, because each one of the plant protein has their own limiting amino acid. So if you can, eat variety of the plant protein, then you can get the proper amounts of the essential amino acid, by doing that.
Medical University. So yeah. Okay, I will
share my slides to you guys. It's okay. Give me a second.
So share the slide, but first I want to share the CV first. I want to read your CV.
Okay.
Sorry, Professor, can you stop your share
Sure,
screen?
okay,
because
okay.
I want to share the CV first.
Okay, I got it. So yes. How can I stop it? How can I stop it? Okay.
Okay, Professor Jung San Chang,
yes.
Associate Professor. So for the educational, he took the plant pathology from Taiwan, and then for the master program, travel abroad to New York, USA, from University of New York, then PhD program in biology, University of New York, USA, and then continue for the postdoc, 2002-2005, postdoc training in hematology and oncology, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, New York, USA. And that I know that his expertise is in neutrophil movement, right?
I told my class.
Okay, so for the professional experience, adjunct lecturer in Queens College, the University of New York, and then postdoc fellow that I mentioned before, and then research associate in hematology and oncology, Mount Sinai, New York, and then continue to Taiwan, assistant professor, Institute of Microbiology and Immunology, and then from 2009 until now, right? Associate professor, Graduate Institute of Medical Science, Taipei Medical University, Taiwan. And I saw so many publication, but his expertise is in highlight in research here. Discovered CD44 drug back, sorry, is one of physiological selectin ligand on neutrophil. That's why now he wants to share about the hematological aspect and COVID-19 patient in pathological situation, especially in Taiwan. So the time for your speech is 30 minutes.
Okay.
After that, we'll continue to Q&A session.
Sure.
So the time is yours.
Sure. Give me a second. Can you read my slide now?
Yes, Prof.
You can read it now?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
So I can start it right now, right? Okay, thank you, Dr. Noor, give me this brief introduction of myself. Okay, I would like to share my expertise. Okay, I used to study sickle cell disease, use transgenic mice, and combine with a intravitreal microscopy. You can see this movie, right? You can see sickle cell shaped red blood cells in the flow, right? And eventually we got the blood clotting and it causes sickle vessel occlusion. Okay, that's my work during my postdoctoral training. I had to figure out what kind of leukocytes in that small venue cause vessel occlusion, blockage of flow. And then I need to do another thing is what kind of adhesion molecules mediate those interactions. And third one, I need to find a candidate drug to reverse those sickle vessel occlusion. That's during my postdoctoral training. Okay, that's my expertise. And the most proud thing of me doing this research, we found a drug, and later on we passed this patent into the pharmaceutical company Pfizer with the $340 million. Okay, that's my honor. After moving to Taiwan, because there's no sickle cell disease patient in Taiwan, so I've shifted for the drug development to target therapy for breast cancer, especially for triple negative breast cancer. Okay, that's a brief introduction of my research in the past and current. And today I'm going to go over the COVID-19 disease, the history, and what caused COVID-19, and what at the infection, what kind of immune response, what developed in the patient, and what kind of therapeutics drug, what kind of prevention for this disease. Okay, that's the content. I'm sorry. And let's see the timeline since December 1st, 2019. The first case was reported, and on the January 7, 2020, this case that the Chinese scientists identified this new transmission disease is belong to a coronavirus. Okay, and then later on, this February 11, 2020, and this virus was named as SARS-CoV-2. And the next day, WHO named this disease as a COVID-19. As COVID-19 stands for Coronavirus Disease of 2019. Okay, and you can see that after less than 6 months, April 2nd, you can see almost 1 million people die or confirm this disease. Okay, and January 15, 2021, you can see that death toll reached to 2 million and keep continuing. So this course is pandemic. A lot of people suffering from this disease, death or post COVID-19 syndrome. Okay, and let's look at this WHO COVID-19 dashboard. A lot of information on it. I received this data on the September 5th. Okay, and that day there are around 7,000 people passed away, okay? And more than 4.6 million people died totally up to the September 5th. And this is probably mortality rates around 2.1%. And then the confirmed case is 221 million people suffering this disease. That's around the 2.8 population on Earth contract COVID-19. So a lot of people live. And so far, only less than 30% people receive the vaccine. Okay, and the United States, Brazil, and India are the top three in mortality rate and contract this disease. Okay, and then look at the dashboard in Taiwan of COVID-19. Up to the September 9th, there are around 16,000 people got this disease, not that much compared to other countries. And on that day, 6 cases are reported, and 4 people are local case, 2 are immigrants or travel to Taiwan. And the total death toll is around 838. And that day, only 1 people passed away. Okay, it seems to me, Taiwan did a pretty good job for quarantine and put the mask on. That's what we do in the past. Okay, and only actually, we had a lot of things to do regarding the vaccination. Only 4.2% received 2 doses of vaccine, and most of them only received 1. 50% of individuals received 1 dose. So that's enough, I think. So so far, we are working on this to solve this problem. Here is the country around the Southeast Asia. You can see that Indonesia has the highest rate in deaths in receiving this disease. And Singapore did the best job in vaccination. More than 80% people get fully protected by vaccination, by vaccine, okay? And since COVID-19 pandemic, okay, you can see this stock market, 2019 dropped very fast, okay? So the impact is huge for economic globally, and the rebound recently on the beginning of January or February of 2021. And let's look at unemployment rate. A lot of people, Western country, European country, Asia, all suffering a lot, the increase 2%, 3%, 5%. And then let's see the traveling make it impossible. Commercial flights remain well below normal level. And also you can see that the tourism, the industry is suffering a lot, okay? And you cannot go over to attend a symposium, okay, something like that. And also the shift the life pattern or working life. For example, we stay home, right? We don't go shopping. We stay home to join the class, online lecture. Everything's changing because of COVID-19. And you can see this, most teachers, professors, they are not satisfied for online lecture. They feel it's not enough for effectiveness for teaching, for lecturing during the online course. Okay, so we are changing. And you can see the shopping, the people don't go more and shop. They stay home, they get it from eBay or something like that. And also you can see this familiar motorbike with the lunch box or dinner box. So let's shift right now food delivery service is so popular in Taiwan. Okay, most of the people shopping by e-commerce in computer, okay? And here, pharmaceutical company gain a lot of stock market because they are doing research or designing the drug for the conquer of the COVID-19. Okay, that's the impact I should show you in probably more than 5 minutes. Now let's go back to introduce what is this COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This is positive sense RNA virus. This virus is encoded by envelope protein. Okay, this virus contain probably 30,000 nucleotides, encode 4 basic fundamental protein: spike protein, envelope protein, and a membrane protein, and a nucleocapsid phosphoprotein. Okay, among them, the spike protein is most important, the subunit, the protein for entry to host the cells. Okay, the size probably around 125 nanometer in the diameter. Okay, this picture was taken from SEM electron microscopy. You can see the virus particle in the cytosol, virus particle in the cytosol, also in the membrane. Okay, that's the last step in the life cycle of this virus. Virus eventually will fuse with the membrane or host the cells, and later on they are going to budding and shedding out to the host the cells. That's the last step. Okay, and you can see that a lot of dots, a lot of spike on it. That's because of the morphology. That's why they call them coronavirus by their image. Okay, and they show very unique structure after they infect host cells. Most of the host cells will grow arm like a tentacle, long arm on their cell surface. And you can see that at probably around 48 hours, you can see a lot of particle backing out to the membrane. Okay, here is from another scan electron microscopy. You can see the surface, a lot of spike from 2 hours to 48 hours incubation. You can see a lot of spike on it and a budding structure. And if you look at the cytoplasm, you can see a lot of vital particle enclosed on the lysosome. Okay, and here is a budding system. Those is consistent to the outlook, the life cycle of coronavirus. Okay, let's go to introduce a very important protein, spike protein here. Spike protein, which contain 2 domains, S1 and S2 domain. S1 domain is to recognize AC2 receptor, which is angiotensin converting enzyme 2. Okay, that's for recognition for entrance of virus into the host cells. Another one, S2 domain, also is very important, which can facilitate virus to fuse with the host membrane, and for the later stage to enter in or get infection, okay, go into the host cells. Okay, let's look at the conformational change of S protein. Here, they bound to the receptor, right? S1 domain. Then they will change the protein structure, the binding, allow this S2 domain to fuse with the membrane. So the virus is able to make a contact with the membrane. And this membrane eventually will help by another protease to do the fusion. Then later on will go into the cytoplasm through the endocytosis pathway. Over there, they will release their RNA into the cytosol and making their protein. Here, going to show you how did you know you got infection. Okay, there are 3 ways. Check the protein, check the genome of virus. The first one, check the virus, use the PCR. Okay, why is the PCR? Protein chain reaction. You provide a primer, you change the time, different time for adenine, for separating strand, and provide a DNA polymers. They will how to say that, amplify a lot of genome, right? If the viral genome in the serum, you can amplify it, and in random gel, you can check. Okay, it takes long time. Okay, it probably take 4 hours, 6 hours. It's a long time. And another one, check antibodies. If you got infected, your serum will produce antibodies. So when you have the antibody against those antibodies, you can find it. This can tell you has been infected by this virus, but you probably don't have the capability to spread on it. But it just tell you got infected before. Another one, check the fragment. or protein of this virus. You use ELISA, use the antibody, check those components of virus. Okay, and those two things are very, very fast. Okay, it's good for screening, but the PCR, it may take a long time. However, a lot of countries allow the traveler go into their country, but you need to show documentation or you has negative approval on COVID-19, right? So what happened? We needed to test. In Taiwan, probably costs around 130 to 160 US dollars. United States probably 250, and United Kingdom probably around 180 to 267 dollars. In Japan, probably around 238 to 500 dollars. But I don't know in your country how much it is for the PCR test. Okay. And also, I'm going to introduce another new way, a lamp. Okay, it's isothermal amplification. Which one? This is also a PCR amplification, which is add not two primer, not one set. They are going to put the 3 or 4 set of primer in there. Okay, they can amplify in 1 hour, and the two of primer, they can form the loop, and then they can add some fluorescent dye or chemical dye in there. So in the end product, you don't need to run the gel to separate the band. Okay, you just look at the color. If they show the bright color, it says positive. And using this method is very fast, probably only 1 hour lasts enough. But there's one negative point. It cannot handle a lot of sample, one each time. Okay, so it's not good enough for the big population screening. It probably is good for a few, 1 or 2 individual. Okay, and also the machine is considerably very expensive compared to PCR machine. Okay, that's the lamp. Okay, let's look at another one. This virus life cycle. Because the positive RNA strand, they can do the they can do transcription. They can make a messenger RNA and do the protein. And their positive strand RNA can make a copy of their own genome. Eventually, will assembly and go to exocytosis and release into the cells. SARS-CoV-2 is zoonotic coronavirus. In other words, they can stay in the animals, also in the human. Okay, there are 3 kinds, 3 strands, which cause a lot of fatality in human beings. In the past 2002, SARS-CoV, okay, more than 700 people died in this disease. And the next year is a MERS-CoV, 2013, around 858 people died. And you can see MERS-CoV-2 death rate is 35%. It's huge. And the SARS is around 10%. How about the COVID-19? Only 2.1, 2.2%. So what makes COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 so dangerous? Because a lot of people with a lot of syndrome, okay, they can pass. Transmission rate is very, very fast. The other 2, you got a symptom, you just isolate them. You can stop the spreading of this disease, okay? Another 4 types of coronavirus is human coronavirus, which the people, there's no report. So there's no disease at all. There's no symptom. Their genome are very, very similar between these 3 types of coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2 or SARS-CoV or MERS-CoV. The only different mutation on these 3 part UTR sites, okay? And you can see that what is the original or intermediate host? Pangolin. Okay, there are 3 kind of animals, okay? So if you go to market or you go to hunting or go to jungle, eventually you will get contaminated in the public contract this disease. And how about transmission between people and people? Cover up, not using a mask because they use a droplet. Some people, some get a contamination by their contact, okay, or other stuff. And it also has been reported and the blood transfusion or transplantation, even will pass the baby through the pregnant ladies, okay? So there are so many paths to transmit this disease from human to human. Okay, now I'm going to go over pathological mechanism here. We know virus is an infectious pathogen will cause immune defense function, will activate immunity, right? That's one. Second one, because the ACE2 receptor are depleting. So I'm going to go over this impact, two very important impact here. ACE2 is a very important enzyme for maintain homeostasis to regulate diameter of venue.
Sorry,
size.
your time is
Yes.
10 minutes remaining. Just a reminder.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Okay, the diameter of venue, okay, blood pressure, and integrity of cell membrane. So after infections, what happened? They were depleting ACE2 receptor on host cells. So what happened? If the patient blood pressure increased, the membrane ECM, endothelial cell layer, is ruptured. So a lot of neutrophils were released, leak because of leakage into the tissue, okay? And also, in other words, will increase inflammation, okay? Cause the lung injury or organ injury, okay? And a slow blood flow. And because ACE2 express a lot of major organs, so we damage a lot of system here, as you see, from liver, kidney, bone, lung, okay, heart. That's the reason why a lot of, the COVID-19 patient will suffer a lot of multiple organ injury, okay? If they cannot recover, we call them long COVID, okay? They got a side effect after infections. Here is because due to a time, I'm going to show you there are a lot of symptoms from the mild on the more complicated syndrome, okay? High fever, okay, trouble. The most important thing is trouble in breathing. Okay, so ACE2 depletion was the also activate macrophage and infiltrate into the tissue, especially in the lung, and also will release a lot of different cytokines here. And of course, a very important disease, we call them ARDS, okay, acute respiratory dysfunction syndrome here. You can see on the tissue of lung, a lot of infiltrated neutrophils or leukocytes in their lung patient. And you can see in the X-ray check, you can see a lot of white spots, okay, as a glass opacity here, okay. You can see that. That's the reason. That's four important tool for diagnosis in the patient. Monitor their progression, okay. We call them white lung. Okay, ARDS. The reason why you see the white lung because a lot of neutrophils go into the tissue, and the lung cells is dying, swelling, a lot of water in there. That's the reason why you look at this white spot over there. You can see in the lung a lot of neutrophils infiltrate to the tissue, release a lot of different protein on it, and cause the huge inflammation here. And the cytokine is good, it's bad, which can kill pathogen or infected host cells, but also will kill the healthy cells, okay? And eventually cause ARDS, failure lung, eventually. Here is the leukocyte cascade. That's my expertise. When you get the infection or injury, the white cells, leukocytes, will start to load, start to fast loading, slow loading, and eventually stuck over there. It migrates into the tissue and it cleans up the wardrobe, engraft the pathogen or the healing tissue. Okay, last we call them leukocyte adhesion cascade. Because the timing, I'm going to skip that. You can see that if you are, that's always show my student in my class. You can see that in the mice, if you are a good doctor and surgeon, you can see there's no activation of white cells. It's very clean, only blood flow. 10 minutes later, adhesion molecule expressed, the white cells start to loading on the venue, right? In the faster pattern. After that, they are going to loading slowly to find the target injury sites, okay? If we knock out the adhesion molecule, even 3 or 4, there's no loading, no recruitment, okay? We call this process of the leukocyte adhesion cascade. Neutrophils do a lot of things. Okay, later on, we are going to tell you what the impact of COVID-19 disease. Okay, as I just mentioned, enzyme, right? Cytokines, and also they will share some very interesting stuff for track. Okay, here a lot of different macrophages also impact the COVID-19 disease. And another one here is cytokines. Cytokines is very important stuff. Later on, we are going to tell you use IL-6 inhibitors, which can apply to the patient in the Taiwan hospital. It's kind of treatment. Okay, use anti-IL-6 cytokines. Okay, and also how many time left? No.
2 minutes more.
Okay, good. Okay, let me see. Last outline, let me see this one. Okay, that's I try to say that also platelets also can facilitate SARS-CoV-2, the pneumonia. The reason why you can see that the granule has a P-selectin granule, which is adhesion molecules, which can recruit a lot of neutrophils into the lung. So that's the reason why, one of the reasons you can see infiltration of the lung in the patient or COVID-19 patient. And another one very interesting, this study correlated to our results in one from hospital, Dennis work. He found the patient suffered COVID-19, their lymphocytes number will drop, okay, and the neutrophils number are increased. And monocytes number is also, some patient experience a drop, some doesn't change it. Okay, in this case, when it's mild, a symptom patient, you can see their cytokine expression is very considerable, very, very low, and normal immune response. So they can recover. However, for severe patient or COVID-19 patient, the cytokine level in their serum is pretty high, okay? And the neutrophils number is high and the lymphocytes is low. And later on, we'll go to a severe syndrome and go to an ICU. So they tell you that one thing, immunity decide the fate of patient, okay? So I would like, okay, due to the time, that's the data here. I also want to say something. After infection, right, and ACE2 depletion, a lot of blood flow decrease, and it will cause decrease the functional organs because there's oxygen supply, because the nutrient supply, because of less flow. And on your lung, you infiltrate a lot of neutrophils, a lot of chemokine on your body, not only the lung, okay? You can, some people get diagnosis virus in the prostate for men, okay? Because also there's receptor on it. Neuron has a receptor too. That's the reason why.
Obatnya ada yang pakai anti parasit itu, anti cacing ya?
Okay.
Buat COVID, tahu nggak?
Okay, due to time, I'm gonna go. In the end, I'm gonna go tell the
Okay,
market.
it's finished, Professor.
Okay, good. Okay, any questions?
Why? Yeah. You prepare for the type of vaccine for COVID-19 because one of our participants asked about the vaccine related. So the question from Afrinia. Thank you, Professor Jung San, for the sharing knowledge. My name is Afrinia from Stikes Mitra Keluarga. We know that many various type of coronavirus, and also we all know there are many various vaccine has been produced.
Yes.
My question is there any difference in effect type of vaccine with type of coronavirus? So you mean side effect, right?
Second, I get confused. One more time, please.
Sorry?
Can you repeat your question one more time?
Okay. So the question is there any different effect, side effect for different type of vaccine? Yes, because we know that the viral particle
my
or
personal
RNA or
opinion,
other things.
I would like to use, traditional vaccine, okay, like a infective virus, or another one was the AZ virus. It's particle, derived from virus of a particle virus. I don't prefer to use mRNA in my opinion. The reason why it's a very short history. It's a new kind of vaccine. I don't know side effect. I don't have added evidence. Okay, in case if this pandemic continue like a flu-like a disease, every year you need to inject the vaccine, especially mRNA, which may cause allergy. Okay, that's is more increase the develop allergy syndrome. Another one is I don't know it's true or not. mRNA need to go into the cells, right? And then make a protein, and protein will stick on the membrane. Some is not shedding onto the blood flow or serum. They just express on the cells. So that's why a lot of medical doctors they observe aggregation or MAC, the antibody against ACE2 on the cell surface. What's the outcome? I don't know. How long we clean this, we don't know. So it's a new technology. So I think I'm more conservative for this issue. I prefer the old traditional antibodies for vaccine. Okay. That's
okay. So
yeah,
it's like I know in Indonesia that I know mostly they use Sinovac or AZ, and in Taiwan mostly you use AZ, right? AZ and Moderna.
Yeah.
Do you find any side effect for the person who injected the AZ or another vaccine? Do you find it?
I don't find it. I think everyone by luck. Okay, some people has different response. Some people doesn't. I receive the AZ. I'm fine, and don't have a developed fever. Okay, so actually by luck. That's my opinion. There's no answer for that. But I would like to comment Sinovac, which made in China. They use the dead virus particle, right, in activate form. That's the reason why the, how to say that word? It's neutralization data is lowest compared to other five vaccines, according to Nature Medicine paper. The reason why I think because the whole virus, so they can produce a lot of different type of whole antibodies. That's the reason why when you harvest those antibodies, the affinity is not that high because it's not pure antibody against ACE2 on the host cells in vitro. If it is a messenger RNA, you particularly designed for ACE2 only. That's why their neutralization assay is so good. okay? But I just want to say, as the vaccine can protect you from this develop the severe disease, that's fine. You don't go to ICU, that's fine. Just because the meaning of vaccine. Okay, that's my opinion. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, since most of us got Sinovac, so we are lucky. That you mean?
No, you can. I think it's a good research study topic. You can do what you learn from Taiwan, collect the data, see what happens, see help or not. You can compare to database from Taiwan in the future or United States. See if the China vaccine is good or bad. Okay, make a comment. As a good research topic. Okay, I just show my opinion. Okay?
Yes. Okay, is there any question for another participant?
Okay, Taiwan also has their own homemade
itu.
vaccine here. As a president of Taiwan, they received the homemade domestic made COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, and in the end, I hope your student can join us like Professor No, Dr. No, come to TMU for study. Attend the graduate school for the master PhD studies. Yeah, school is, you can ask Dr. No, it's very close to 101. A lot of foreign students from overseas, Vietnamese and the Indonesia students are majority in our campus. Okay, and our ranking recently, I want to share one thing. In TMU, only 60, just 61 years old. Okay, and we improve a lot. You can see our ranking in Asia, in world. Okay, so hopefully your school can grow up very, very fast and become very famous in Indonesia, in Asia also.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen, Professor. Thank you. Is there any question? We still have like 2 minutes more.
Sure. I'm sorry, I was prepared to.
Sorry, teacher. So because since we have so many cases in Indonesia, and one of the problem is asymptomatic.
Yes.
So like, do you have any idea what's wrong with so many asymptomatic cases in Indonesia?
Okay, I think the most important work right now is collect all the vaccine. Okay, anyone got a 2 dose of vaccine and it can protect you from getting severe COVID-19 syndrome. That's the most important part. I watch baseball every day. You look at I'm the New York Yankee fan. You see the United States, there are 30,000 cases per day, but they don't wear a mask. They still go to Yankee Stadium to watch the baseball because they got the vaccine. They are not developed a very severe form. They try to make a friend with the virus right now. Okay, eventually, as a point of evolution, they are going to become a friend with virus. Okay, us just like a fruit. Okay, we don't care. Okay, that's most the issue. Get the vaccine, get fully protected from severe, avoid severe form of COVID-19. That's my opinion. And otherwise, in Taiwan, we sacrifice a lot of business, right? For example, we have 14 days quarantine at home. We don't go to restaurant. Okay, we cover the mouth every day. We're suffering a lot. Okay, we cannot breathe freely, fresh air, right? We stay home, eat, cannot go to a restaurant. We lost the normal life, the beautiful life. That's not good, I think. So get protected. That's the most important part, as think? Why you
Yes.
think that no? You see, you cannot bike anymore, right?
Yeah. Maybe we will just allow another question. But we have a 4 minutes more.
Sure.
Is there any question?
I cannot hear you because the volume is so low. Sorry. Can you who can help now?
Okay. Maybe we need to put my head in the laptop. Is there any question? Because it's interesting topic, and yeah, we face the same problem in Indonesia. So I think it's the time for asking this question.
Yeah.
It's okay if you want to ask in Bahasa, just write on the chat box. I will help to translate it. Maybe one question more. For the student.
Dr. Noah, you gotta help your student to come to TMU for their graduate study.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure. For the student, if you are like pharmacist or medical laboratory technology or nursing or nutrition, is open to try to apply, especially for alumni, to TMU.
Dr. Jack will help you guys. Okay. Okay, any questions?
Apakah ada pertanyaan? Saya akan bantu mentranslate jika ada pertanyaan dalam bahasa Indonesia. It's okay. Satu pertanyaan lagi. If there is no question, so I will. Okay. There is a question.
Okay.
So from Naufal Hisham, first of all, thank you so much, Professor. And I'm Naufal from Stikus Mitra Keluarga. I want to ask something. Third dose of vaccine may be needed to increase the protection from COVID-19 virus. The question is, do you think it's effective to mix the vaccine and use different COVID vaccine, like first and second dose with the different vaccine? Is it safe or okay, in your opinion?
I think it's safe. It's a lot of European countries that did this already, okay? And the Taiwan, I think the medical doctor or nursing, they plan to do that, okay, with the Moderna and also how to say that, another one, AZ, okay? So we plan to do that also. I think it's okay, and it probably will improve a lot because they were complementary to the another fragment or spike protein. I think it's a good idea. And if they are I don't think third dose is required. I don't think so. 2 doses, that's good enough.
Health staff, they have the third dose.
You look at the literature. I think they just published this today. Okay, a lot of people say it's kind of West. I think European countries need to save those vaccines for some country, which they don't even have a 1 dose at all. Okay, they should share, not only for particular ethnic or people or country.
Okay, for the last question from Afrinia again, what kind of vaccine that you use in Taiwan? I know that you create yourself one of the vaccine, right?
I use AZ. How about you? Did you receive vaccine yet?
Yes, Sinovac in Indonesia. I'm not priority in Taiwan, so I didn't get it. But
no, I know last didn't get the vaccine.
Yeah, I need to pay. And now
Really?
I know you create the vaccine, right? Medigen from Taiwan.
Yeah.
So how
about your friend? What was under supervision? Lin Qiufeng, what's his name?
Yeah, Danny. Yeah, because Danny need to pay.
Really? He
Yes.
paid? How much?
Pay before the COVID-19 is blow up the cases in Taiwan, so they are the priority. I mean, they got the chance. But when I apply, even I need to pay is okay. But after that, the cases is high in Taiwan, and I'm not a priority anymore. So
okay.
So Medigen, can you just a short brief? How about your country vaccine?
So right now, I think we need this industry. And however, does the government screw up on it? Okay, they promote it too much. When you exaggerate too much, people don't think it's real. Okay, but we do need industry. Okay, I think they are safe because the DNA sequence are provide from NIH. Okay, they are same strand, same frame of the mRNA Moderna. Okay, they are same from the same lab, and unfortunately, they are too slow. They even did not complete the phase 3 trial. That's the reason why the people doesn't want to use it. But I think it's safe. But the government probably put a lot of money, invested a lot of money already, so they keep promoting this vaccine. But people don't trust it without the
understand.
Yeah.
So So I know also your president get the vaccine created by you, by Taiwan.
But very important. I think every country, also your country, needed this vaccine in the future. You needed this kind of industry. You can see the COVID-19. You can see that they hold the vaccine as a weapon. That's not good.
Okay. I'm sorry for one question because the limited time, the time is over. So we need to say goodbye to Professor Jung San Chang. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So yeah, now we will continue to the third speaker, Professor Jan Willem Alvenaar. Lihat udah join belum? Oh, masih share screen. Okay, now we are turning to the third speaker, Professor Jan Willem Alvenaar, PhD, PharmD, with the topic Therapeutic Drug Monitoring in Infectious Disease from the University of Sydney, Australia. So for the first, I want to read the CV of him. Please show the CV. Okay, for the CV, nice picture. So Professor Jan Willem Alvenaar is a hospital pharmacist and clinical pharmacologist at the University of Sydney, Faculty of Medicine and Health, School of Pharmacy and the Westmead Hospital, who aims to optimize antimicrobial therapy based on PK/PD principle. For the former education, the University Medical Center Groningen in the Netherlands awards Young Investigator Award of the International Association of Therapeutic Drug Monitoring and Clinical Toxicology in 2015. In the work, publication, and research, principal investigator of many clinical trials studying pharmacokinetics of antimicrobial drugs, and as expert advisor on clinical pharmacology of anti-TB drugs. Also, we have many cases of TB in Indonesia. Also research in tuberculosis and invasive fungal infection focuses on personalized dosing in a routine care using innovative dried blood spot sampling and point of care saliva testing. He has published over than 290 or so many articles in international peer-reviewed journal. So please welcome Professor Jan Willem Alvenaar. The time is yours. For the talk is 30 minutes and then continue for the Q&A session.
Thank you for the kind invitation and the nice introduction of my resume. So today I'm going to talk to you about therapeutic drug monitoring in infectious diseases. And I would like to hope to answer two questions. Why do we need TDM and how are we going to do it? So the first thing to realize is that we're dealing with a complex situation. We have, of course, a pathogen that makes our patients sick. And we give drugs to a patient to cure the patient, but of course, these drugs cause side effects. The bacteria tries to get rid of the bacteria by increasing all kinds of efflux pumps, becoming resistant. So this is a very complex situation. We do know that it is important to start with treatment as soon as possible. You can see on the figure on the left side of this slide, there's the sooner you start treatment with effective medication, you can reduce mortality. On the right figure, you can see that with increased drug exposure, you also reduce mortality. So that means that you have to hit fast and hit hard. We all heard about antimicrobial resistance, and this is of course a major problem because if we are infected with a resistant pathogen, then we have very few therapeutic options left. And in some situations, there's actually no antimicrobial available anymore. And yeah, unfortunately, patient will die in such situation. So on the left side situation, on this graph, you see a line with the solid line going down. That means that bacteria are dying. And the dashed line means the resistant subpopulation is not coming up, so it's not increasing. So also the resistant bacteria are suppressed. On the right figure, you can see that the susceptible bacteria are still declining, shown by the solid line. However, if the exposure is not sufficient, then the resistant subpopulations is able to overcome the dosage and still grow. So we're actually selecting the resistant pathogens by having too low drug exposure. So what do we know about low drug exposure? So if we look at the information brochure that comes with the antimicrobial drug, so if we read through the package, there is one dose. And one dose is suitable for the person on the left slide that looks every day the same. However, if we look in our clinic, patients are not the same. Patients have different age, patients have different weight, patients have different genetic makeup, so they may metabolize drugs differently, they have different renal function, and so that results in a significant variability in drug exposure. So if we can look a little bit at the details of this drug exposure, most importantly is, of course, drug absorption when we give a patient an oral tablet. So we see the reference line in black, and the red line is shown and reflecting malabsorption, which we typically would see in critically ill patients, patients on the ICU. Or we see the blue line reflecting, for example, patients with diabetes with disturbed absorption of the drug. If we move on to the volume of distribution, it could be that we are dosing a very big patient at high body weight, obese patients. They may have a different volume of distribution. We're talking about patients on extracorporeal support, also increasing the volume of distribution. Also, organ function can differ. So if we have reduced renal function, then drugs will accumulate, and accumulation can cause toxicity, harming our patient. Of course, drug-drug interactions, etc., will also influence our drug exposure. So there are many reasons that support the idea that drug exposure in patients is different, and we need to correct for that. So when we're talking about targets for therapeutic drug monitoring, we have to understand some of the definitions that are relevant for the efficacy of antimicrobial drugs. So we see here the concentration time profile. And for some of the drugs, it's important to have a high peak concentration, like, for example, aminoglycosides. If we're talking about most antimicrobial drugs like fluoroquinolones, and then the AUC is important. This is the total exposure during the day a patient is getting from a dose of drugs. And last but not least, we have time above MIC, and that is of course relevant for beta-lactam antimicrobial drugs. And that's why we give these drugs so frequently to maximize the time the concentration is above MIC. And this has implications for dosing. And so if we're looking at frequent dosing, it's about the time above MIC. If it is a single high dose, then it's important to look at Cmax. And if it really doesn't matter how you give the drug as long as it is in the patient, then the AUC is important. So now we have to define that therapeutic window. And the lower level of the therapeutic window is defined by when the drug becomes active. And of course, you want to have it as active as possible for many patients. So we're looking at concentrations that at least result in efficacy of about 80 or 90% of the patients. Of course, the upper level is kept by the fact that it will start causing toxicity. So depending on how toxic a drug is, it could be a narrow therapeutic range or a broad therapeutic range. And the latter one is that if you keep increasing the dose, you will not see any significant toxicity, but with a narrow therapeutic range, you will see immediate toxicity. So you have to figure out how to get between the subtherapeutic and supratherapeutic. So you have to focus how to get in that window. So with this therapeutic drug monitoring, what we're actually doing is using a drug and just optimizing the dose to make sure that the concentration is appropriate for our patients. And there are a few criteria which we need to keep in mind when we want to apply therapeutic drug monitoring. And one of the most important ones is that there needs to be a correlation between the concentration of the drug and the effect. So in our case, the kill of the bacteria or the fungi and or the toxicity. So if we know that there is a correlation between one of these, there is a reason to start monitoring, especially when there is variability in drug concentrations between or within patients. Also, it's important that the clinical effect is difficult to monitor. And for example, if we're talking about blood pressure medicine, you can just simply measure blood pressure. But if you're suffering from an infection, it's difficult to measure how severe the infection is. And you can, of course, perform cultures of the bacteria and count the number of bacteria in a culture, but that is a lot of work. It takes time, and often a patient doesn't have that time, especially when they're critically ill. So therefore, therapeutic drug monitoring is used for particular drugs. And when we look how there's a way to approach that is, of course, the drug is selected. And often we have guidelines also including a particular dose for the patient. And then when treatment is started, the doctor evaluates how it's going, and hopefully we end up with a cured patient. If we want to apply TDM, this is what is most frequently done. It's a kind of reactive approach. So patient is not responding to treatment, or patient is suffering from toxicity, and then we measure a level and adjust treatment. However, there's also an alternative approach where we look at a proactive way of sampling. So that means that we already collect the sample before there's any toxicity, before patient is failing, but we just want to make sure that the concentration is appropriate. And this can, of course, be guided by specific risk factors. So if we know from studies that, for example, patients in the ICU have lower exposure, and then you have a good reason to assess the drug exposure in such a patient. So when we start selecting for TDM, we can do from a drug perspective. So some drugs show significant variability in pharmacokinetics, or they have a narrow therapeutic window. Of course, we can look from patient or disease perspective. Then we look at immunocompromised patients, critically ill patients, or vulnerable patients like babies. In those situations, there's often not much time to wait and see what happens with the treatment. You want to make sure that you're all spot on. If we look from pathogen perspective, we are looking at pathogens that are more resistant than the pathogens we would normally see in our clinics, so pathogens with higher MIC values. So this is the first example. It's fluconazole. So this is the third-line treatment for yeast infections susceptible to fluconazole. It's renally cleared, typically well absorbed, only a little bit metabolized, and generally well tolerated. So therapeutic drug monitoring is not recommended for this drug in the guidelines. However, we were interested to see if there would be a subpopulation that could benefit from this activity to optimize the dose. So we looked at children in our hospital that received fluconazole for invasive candida infections, and we used reference values for drug exposure. Eventually, that was a trough concentration of about 10 milligrams per liter. So when we looked at the different categories, we found that the patients with cancer had substantial lower levels of fluconazole compared to the other children that received this drug. Even though the dose was a little bit higher than for other populations, their exposure was lower. And this was simply caused by the fact that many children with chemotherapy also received lots of fluids to wash away the chemotherapy. And as fluconazole is a hydrophilic compound, it was washed away with the suppletion fluids. So what they actually needed to do was resupply fluconazole after a course of chemotherapy to make sure that levels were okay. So in this case, we have a specific subpopulation that may benefit from therapeutic drug monitoring. Fluorocortisol is another example of this is a first-line treatment, in this case for mold infections. But we know from literature there's highly variable pharmacokinetics. We know that there are various CYP enzymes involved in the metabolism. And we also know that there is significant toxicity with these drugs. So this may be a suitable candidate for therapeutic drug monitoring. If you look, for example, at the different polymorphisms for the CYP enzymes, and in particular 2C19, we can see that in ultra-rapid metabolizers, the drug exposure is 6-fold lower than in patients with poor metabolizing. So there's a huge range in drug exposure if patients receive the same dose. So there is a good reason to modify dosages in these ultra-rapid or poor metabolizers. So when they first started to explore what happened in clinical practice, and on the left we can see therapeutic success, and in the right we can see toxicity, they found that there was a clear correlation between efficacy of these drugs with a therapeutic range of about 1 to 5, 6-ish, and that above that level there was significant more toxicity. Later on, when they did larger cohort studies, and this was a study from 2012 and one from 2017, that they showed that irrespective of where these studies were organized, the therapeutic range was about similar So above a concentration 1.7, you can see that efficacy improved, and with a level above 5, then they significantly saw more toxicity. So at various studies, the results were consistent. So with all this data, we can, of course, try to define a therapeutic window. And we have various studies at their disposal. We, of course, have the in vitro studies, where we can have detailed information on various drug exposures and how that would affect the kill of the pathogen or acquired resistance. We have in vivo studies where we look at animals, and perhaps these animals can have various stages of their immune system. We can create animals with a lacking immune system. And of course, we have our observational human data. So if we go through such a procedure and we start at the top of the slide with the favorable target in animal studies, it was a FAUC over MIC of about 20 to 25, and look at the MIC distribution based from patient swabs, they show that the MIC 90 was about 0.5. So when we start recalculating from those values what's happening in clinical practice with, for example, drug exposure at a typical dose, including protein binding, translating an AUC to an MIC, we end up with a target trough concentration of about 2 milligrams per liter. And if we go back to our previous slide, you can see on the left side that efficacy started to increase when levels were above 1.3 and 1.7. So, and that comes in about the same range as our theoretical exercise for the therapeutic target for the trough concentration. Of course, you have to evaluate what happens in your clinical practice. So with these targets as defined in the graph, trough level of about 2 as under level and the upper level of about 5 milligrams per liter for toxicity, we evaluated therapeutic drug monitoring on our ICU, and we found a significant number still of underexposure and overexposure. So we needed to do something to increase the number of patients within the therapeutic range. And if we looked at the real-life data, found that a lot of samples were either collected too early or too late during treatments. And the same thing applied when we looked at recollection of samples after dose adjustment. So the actual protocol was not adhered to as we would like it to see. So for example, we learned that we should not report levels after 1 p.m. on Friday afternoon because physicians went home already by that time. So when we report results from the lab, we should do it on Friday morning early so people can still adjust. We can also improve our quality of dose adjustment advice by using dosing software. And if it's even better organized, you can have therapeutic drug monitoring as part of your stewardship team in your hospital. So if we just pause, where are we? So we know there are many underlying reasons for TDM. We know that there's PK variability, the correlations with efficacy and toxicity. And we know that we can select based on drug, disease, and pathogen. And we know a little bit on how to define target concentration and how to optimize our therapeutic drug monitoring performance. But we didn't talk yet about the resources, the facilities, and the equipment. Because not everybody has the luxury of all the mass spectrometry and all the nurses and all the money to support such TDM services. So this is what a typical high-end TDM looks like with a lot of mass spectrometry, but of course, many hospitals lack such facility. Now, of course, we need basic equipment like centrifuges and freezers, and if we send it to a reference laboratory, we need to have some dry ice at our disposal. But still, in many settings, this is not available. And then if you want to optimize dosing, you start pulling out your hair because what is the option that you have? So should do something about this. It's a remote setting, so it's about geography, it's about sample stability. So we need to do something to control. And one of the options is to work on dry blood spot monitoring. And that simple finger prick and collection of a drop of blood on a filter paper card, which is, if we look, for example, at a highly unstable drug as rifampicin, on the left, we see what's happening after 48 hours at room temperature in a blood sample. So there's over 25% decay of your rifampicin. But if we look at the table on the right side, we can see that at 37 degrees for 30 days, we see the same decay in a dry blood spot.
Sorry, Professor.
Yes.
You still have 10 minutes remaining. I just remind you. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can see that the stability is significantly improved when we're using a dried sample. So when we start thinking of dried samples, we have to make sure that when we do our stability experiments, that they have to mimic real life situations. You can leave them on the benchtop in your lab, but what we would like to do is send these samples, put them in the mailbox, have them in the sun, and see what's happening at those conditions. So what we did, we performed a feasibility study in 4 different countries, 4 different settings, so in Bangladesh, Belarus, Indonesia, and Paraguay. And we provided people with a written instruction and a video in English, and we see how people could adapt to using these dried blood spot procedures. And when we received the samples, we assessed them for 19 different criteria, looking at the integrity of the card, how it was dried, what the volume looked like, how the spots look like. And you can see the different spots at the bottom, and some were acceptable, some were unacceptable. At least it provided us some information how it looked like. So when we analyzed all the various criteria from the various settings, we found that, for example, only 40% of the spots were useful when collected in Bangladesh under their conditions, and highest quality was achieved in Indonesia with 80% of the spots with suitable quality. So we needed to improve quality of these sampling procedures, and some of them are incorporated in the technological devices of the spots cards, or using indicators, or we even developed a smartphone app to assess the quality of your spot, and if appropriate, then you would send it to the laboratory and not earlier. And we also developed a guideline covering all the analytical and clinical aspects of dry blood spot validation. And we know that there are additional criteria compared to liquid sample analysis with LC-MS. You have to look at what happens with the hematocrit value, because we're looking at whole blood. We have to look at how the volume is spreading on the paper card, what happens if the volume is different, etc., etc. We also need to make some comparison between venously collected blood and finger prick blood. So you make sure that the reference range that you apply based on liquid sample is also applicable for the dried sample. So even in Australia, we experience delay due to distances. And in this case, it was sampling in a rural hospital in New South Wales. And unfortunately, they didn't have the assay, so they had to send it to Sydney. And that results in a 3 to 7 day delay in reporting a result. So for many settings, that delay is not acceptable, especially if you're critically ill. So we should find alternative solutions, and we would like to make them affordable, simple, short turnaround time, and ideally non-invasive. So we started looking at different types of available equipment, and in this case, we looked at a nanophotometer and a small drop of saliva. And we validated this assay for levofloxacin, which is a drug that penetrates in saliva. And we were able to identify from a cohort of 50 patients, and 9 patients had low targets based on their blood levels. With this simple saliva assay, we were able to identify 8 of these 9 patients. Alternatively, you can also look at urine. And in this case, they looked at a urine simple assay, and they used a smartphone to look at the color of the urine to quantify rifampicin concentrations. And as you can see, this resulted in a nice correlation, also able to identify patients with too low exposure, just using a simple smartphone. So if we're talking about how we can make sure that TDM for infectious diseases is implemented in a variety of settings, and we have our remote settings where we can have our on-site point of care testing using saliva or urine. We can either collect micro samples, dried samples, and send them to regional or central facilities where they have appropriate HPLC UV or mass spectrometry. And of course, when you are already in a tertiary care center, you likely have access to high-end equipment. So if we're looking at how we envision therapeutic drug monitoring daily practice, of course, we have to select our drug based on the most appropriate diagnostic tests, then use a dose that is suitable for your patient based on patient characteristics like renal function, body weight, age, etc. And when we start implementing our TDM, we have to make sure that sampling is appropriately timed and analyzed, and that the result is made available as soon as possible so you can actually adjust your treatment and cure your patient. So I think what is very important to realize is that students can do a lot to advance therapeutic drug monitoring. And I've used this example in many cases. So students often go on clinical placements in hospitals or outpatient settings, and they learn from working with the teams while collecting data, doing audits, and that helps to improve quality in the hospital. It helps to give the let's say, overburdened healthcare workers additional support in running clinical trials, etc. So there is a win-win for everyone in this situation. So I'd like to conclude with summarizing the key messages from this talk. So with therapeutic drug monitoring, we're able to increase efficacy and reduce toxicity of our treatment by adjusting the dose. It may be life-saving in the most critically ill patients, and it can become cost-effective when we are able to reduce length of stay or can prevent ICU admission. When we're talking about how we are going to do it, especially in situations in remote settings, and we can use microsampling with dried blood spots to send sample to laboratories, or we can make use of point of care tests using saliva or urine. And advancing research in TDM is possible if we work together with staff, students, and hospital employees. And with this, I would like to end my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Professor Jan Willem Alvenaar, for your standing speech. So we will continue to the Q&A. I want to ask you, do you have a time or available for the Q&A section? Okay. So in the chat box, we have one question from Melania Perwitasari. The question is how we choose the correct time to get the sample to result correct drug concentration in blood, as we know that there is
yeah, so that is a very important question.
Variability.
So the first decision that we have to make is, what is the mechanism of action of the drug? Is it Cmax over MIC? Is it AUC over MIC? Or is it time above MIC? If it's time above MIC, likely a trough concentration will do. If it's a peak concentration, you want to make sure that you either collect a sample at the end of the infusion or a little bit later, depending on the type of infusion. If we're talking about AUC, in many situations, there is a good correlation between the trough sample and the AUC. So we can use the trough as a surrogate for AUC. If that's not the case, then we have to do some modeling and simulation first and calculate a limited sampling strategy. We've published several papers on limited sampling strategies for tuberculosis drugs. So that means that, for example, with a sample taken 1 hour and 4 hours after drug intake, you can precisely calculate the AUC of that particular drug.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Is there any question from the participant? Or in Bahasa also okay. I will try to help. Okay, from Ayu, for the participant, there is a question. My name is Ayu from Stikes Mitra Keluarga. TDM is a clinical practice to increase the effectiveness of therapy and minimize the risk of adverse drug reaction. I would like to ask how selection therapeutic for complication patient. Example, infectious disease accompanied by hypoglycemia and hypertension.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And what we basically want to know is there a correlation between the concentration of the drug and the efficacy or toxicity? And for that, we need our preclinical studies, we need our observational data. Without that information, therapeutic drug monitoring is useless because we don't know what we're targeting. So before we can move on to TDM, we need to have that data. So before we start, we have to do our in vitro studies and also our clinical observational studies. Once we know what we can target, then we can make appropriate intervention strategies. And of course, for infectious diseases, monitoring efficacy is more challenging because we don't know the exact number of bacteria what's in the patient. And with high blood pressure, we can just simply measure the blood pressure and it's still too high. We give a little bit more. And with infectious disease, we don't have that opportunity to act that rapidly based on our observations. So we use TDM as a kind of surrogate marker. So we know that if the level is above a certain value, that patients typically would respond. So if the concentration is too low, then we already assume that therapy is not going to be successful. So we use that information to increase the dose.
Thank you. And then there is a question. The third question from Dede. I'm Dede from Stikes Mitra Keluarga. Want to ask something? So it is the case applied in Indonesia. So azithromycin is an antibiotic used to treat bacterial infection, but azithromycin is used to treat COVID-19 patient. Is it safe and effective?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question because we see that a lot. We have marketed drugs and then we have a new disease and then we trial the old drug whether it works for the new disease. When doing so, we forget the whole procedures that pharmaceutical companies normally would do to develop a dose for a new disease. They go through preclinical studies, they go through phase 1 and phase 2 studies before they find the dose what is appropriate and then move on to phase 3 studies. And what we've now seen with COVID, and that some people do a little bit of in vitro studies, they see some effect, and then we immediately move on to clinical practice, and we use the drug in the currently accepted dose. But what we don't know is whether that dose is actually effective in patients, because the dose was designed for another disease. So we need to get more data on the use of these types of drugs. So preferably this is done in observational trial setting. What that means that you give that drug, you look at drug levels, and you will look at response parameters. So it could be a viral load, could be inflammatory markers, et cetera, to actually see where there is a response when we start our treatment. So azithromycin is a safe drug. We know that because we've used this drug for many other diseases, and it has some additional benefits, like it reduces some inflammatory markers. That's why we are also using it in asthma and COPD. But whether it is a very effective drug for COVID itself remains to be seen. Likely it helps with reducing bacterial superinfections that we see in patients with viral infections. And the same with fungal infections. They also occur a lot in patients with viral infections. And we've seen that with COVID as well. If you have COVID and Aspergillus, this is very bad news. Same as in the past where you had the flu and Aspergillus infection, was also very bad news. And so we know that these patients with viral infections ending up on our ICU are very vulnerable patients to not only the viral infection, but also other infections that will occur concomitantly.
So since we still have a time, so I will open for another question. Is there any question there? Okay, maybe I will ask something. So actually I'm not in the pharmacy background. So I know that one of the drug, colistin, colistin can treat the bacteria, multi-drug resistant bacteria. And that I know colistin have like not so good PK and PD. So is there any option for alternative to use the colistin? Because the colistin is effective to treat, but have a PK and PD is quite low. Or maybe, I don't know, is combination to another antibiotic is the good way or not?
Yeah, so colistin is of course an old drug, and it has become more a hot topic because it is still effective against some resistant pathogens. But we have to look at this particular pathogen. Where is that infection located? Because if you're talking about pulmonary infections, it can sometimes be much more effective to inhale the drug than to give it as oral or as IV administration. Because with inhaled exposure, we can have very high concentrations in the lung, able to kill the resistant bacteria. While if we would give that same drug as IV administration, it would not achieve that same concentration. So I think we should start using drugs more wisely, looking at where does the drug go when we administer it, what is the concentration at that particular site, and is that likely to kill the bacteria. And indeed, combining drugs when they show synergy. So that means that if we combine two drugs, they are more effective than the single drugs. And then that is a wise decision, especially for resistant bacteria.
Nice. So maybe I will open for only one question. Is there any question? The last question? Maybe you can type in Bahasa. Okay, one last question from Melania. Related to TDM in remote setting, is there any time requirement to send the sample?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're in remote setting, it depends a little bit on the type of patient you're treating. So if you're treating very sick patients, you don't want to send samples somewhere else because likely it takes too much time. So in those situations, you want to have point of care tests using like urine or saliva, like it's shown in the presentation. So then you can measure and adapt very quickly. In case intervention is not very urgent, you can indeed send a sample with the mail, and it can take a week, and that is no problem as long as you've proven that your sample is stable at the temperature. And looking, for example, at HIV treatment. So this is a lifelong treatment. So interventions typically don't need to occur overnight. There is some time when you regularly see your patient. So in that case, you would be able to send a sample to a laboratory and get the result a week later. And of course, when we're talking about patients on an ICU, you don't want to wait for a week because either patient is died or is discharged to normal ward or to home situation. So in that case, waiting for a week is not timely enough to make your intervention. So that is very important. What drives your acceptance criteria for turnaround time?
Thank you, Professor Jan Willem Alphenaar, for the interesting discussion in this afternoon. So maybe because of the limited time, so thank you for all of your speech for the discussion also.
Thank you.
So say goodbye to Professor Jan Willem. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are turning to the end of the second session of the conference. And 3 speakers has already spoken, and then we'll continue to the, I will send it to host Laurentine.
Thank you, Mr. Nur Andrian Ilsan. Excellencies, participants, ladies and gentlemen, we are now arriving to the end of our agenda. Before that, we would like to remind you to fill the link of attendance that we will share in the chat box. Excellencies, participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the first International Lighthouse Student Conference 2021, we would like to thank you for your participation, and don't forget to join with us again for tomorrow's session on 8 AM Western Indonesia time. Thank you very much.